love, social convention, gender roles, and religion. Charlotte Bronte's most famous novel challenges ideas on all these topics, and we are here to discuss it. I'm Charlene.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Jane Eyre Files. Chapter 8. Serenity in Her Air. Hello, husband.
Hello, good girl.
Thank you. That sounds perfect.
I mean, I was kind of hurt in this chapter. I think I mentioned it to you off the air. There's not a lot of terms used to describe Jane in this particular chapter. And so I just have to say to you, Charlene, we shall think you what you prove yourself to be. Continue to act as a good girl, and you will satisfy us.
Oh, well, I will do that then.
Wisdom from the great Miss Temple.
Yes, we have a lot of great characters shining in this chapter. Jane gets a moment to express herself. Helen expresses herself very well, I think.
Oh, spitting some truth.
Yes.
Seriously, in this chapter, yeah.
And then we get to hear more from Miss Temple, who's turning out to be such a great character and a great help for Jane. Mm-hmm. So let's just dive right in, and I'll start with the SparkNotes Chapter 8 summary. Finally, at 5 o'clock, the students disperse and Jane collapses to the floor. Deeply ashamed, she is certain that her reputation at Lowood has been ruined, but Helen assures her that most of the girls felt more pity for Jane than revulsion at her alleged deceitfulness. Jane tells Miss Temple that she is not a liar and relates the story of her tormented childhood at Gateshead. Miss Temple seems to believe Jane and writes to Mr. Lloyd requesting confirmation of Jane's accounts of events. Miss Temple offers Jane and Helen tea and seed cake, endearing herself even further to Jane. When Mr. Lloyd's letter arrives and corroborates Jane's story, Miss Temple publicly declares Jane to be innocent. Relieved and contented, Jane devotes herself to her studies. She excels at drawing and makes progress in French. So we begin chapter 8 right where chapter 7 ends, and Jane is you see Jane's reaction to being put in front of the class and humiliated by Mr. Brocklehurst, and that level of strength that she displayed just completely leaves her, and she falls to the floor weeping, and then Helen comes.
What I thought was funny was it literally picks up right where it left off. Mm-hmm. And it's been a week or so since I read. And so the way I read it was that, she said something about collapsing to the floor. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. So her day of school was done and she's just kind of relaxing. And I was like, wait a minute. As I continue to read, I'm like, that's right. She was on the stool.
Right.
Like I had to remember and go back and see, that's literally right where the chapter ended. She was still on the stool when the chapter ended, right?
Yeah. So I guess it's probably interesting to think of why Charlotte Bronte ended that chapter the way she did, but then she did focus on Helen and the strength that she was imparting to Jane.
Yeah, we keep talking about that, how it's not weird where she breaks the chapters, but it's unique. Mm-hmm. Like they could be a bigger chapter, but she kind of carves it up and it makes it a little bit easier for us to read and we can focus in on it. But yeah.
Correct, yeah.
And as much as she is showing strength, as you say, I also feel like she's still, the passion is there. She's also still that overly dramatic 10-year-old girl, I did, there's a quote here where she's talking about how I meant to be so good at Lowood, and she mentions wanting to make so many friends and earn respect. Mm-hmm. And then she closes by saying, here I lay again, crushed and trodden on, and could I ever rise more? Never, I thought, and ardently I wish to die. Just something like a petulant child would say, she's been punished and now she kind of has to deal with it, even if the punishment was unfair.
Yeah, I do wonder if Charlotte Bronte, how does Charlotte Bronte channel a child? Because I feel like this feels true to how a child would feel if something like this happened to them, and they think, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and nothing can be worse.
Yeah, but like you said, that strength that you're talking about, I think it doesn't really show up until later in the chapter.
For Jane.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think it's more about once she has a chance to talk to Helen and Miss Temple, and then get the wonderful treatment she gets from Miss Temple, and the fairness that she never got from Mr. Brocklehurst, then you start to see some more of that strength. She's a completely different person at the end of this chapter than she is at the beginning, I've noticed. Of all the chapters we've read so far, this seems to features some of the greatest development of her character in such a short span of time.
Well, I could see that, yeah.
Nothing sustained me. Left to myself, I abandoned myself. I'd meant to be so good and to do so much at Lowood. To earn respect, to win affection.
Jane, come, drink something.
I could not yet abate my agitation, though I tried hard. Helen remained as silent as an Indian.
We also get some character development from Helen and Miss Temple, and I thought, at least let's talk about, because we're going to talk about Helen and Jane further, but let's talk about Miss Temple real quick, about how she's such a great nurturing mother figure for Jane. And she, you know, I also, it's like she was looking for Jane. I wonder if Miss Temple did that a lot for the children who had their hair cut by or Mr. Brocklehurst wanted their hair cut in the previous chapter. Did she go over to them and also comfort them? But she does. Miss Temple seems to do a lot for these kids.
Well, she's superintendent, right? She has to overcome the cost-cutting measures that Mr. Brocklehurst is forced on them.
But she just cares a lot for them.
Well,
and it's so refreshing to get that in this book so far, when these kids, a lot of kids are not being treated well in these opening chapters.
And it doesn't really, Charlotte Bronte doesn't really allude to it, but you have to assume that Miss Temple probably has done this several times.
Yeah,
kids who have had to stand on that stool.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah,
yeah. Like, I mean, I don't know if there's no mention of it. I don't think we've seen Helen has gotten treated like this. She's the only one.
Having special treatment.
Other girls having their hair cut or whatever is one thing, but like, I feel like when once you see when Miss Temple and Jane and Helen all hang out together, and you start to understand the bond between Helen and Miss Temple due to Helen's affliction.
Although I do wonder, if that Helen, Miss Temple sees Miss Scatcherd kind of browbeat Helen, so then maybe that's why Miss Temple kind of reached out to Helen and wanted to talk to her, befriend her, and then they became this, like, they had this little study group going.
Well, like I said, I wonder if Miss Temple is aware of Helen's condition. I mean, I know that she's
sick. Oh,
yeah,
right.
Like she's coughing all over the place, but I wonder if the other teachers aren't concerned about that, whereas Miss Temple's the one that maybe has gotten to know her well enough.
Yeah.
Especially if she's pulling her aside after she's been on the stool, whereas the other teachers probably are just like, okay, whatever, you got your punishment, move on. Mm-hmm. Miss Temple's just kind of reminding them it's okay, you're here for a reason. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry that you had to be punished by either Mr. Brocklehurst or the other teachers, but as long as she's not undermining the authority of the other people, the other teachers, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunate that when you're dealing with the food situation that's awful, and yet Miss Temple has to keep doing it out of her own. It's a shame. I mean, it's a shame that you need to have somebody doing that. Like, that won't be more of the
fighting for these children to get sustenance.
Yeah, like you'd think that the school should be doing that on its own, but and I think one of the thoughts that came to me finishing this chapter when you look at Miss Temple as well is that I just think that it's amazing what a teacher can do to lift a child's confidence. Because like in the beginning of the chapter, Jane hates Lowood.
Oh, yeah.
And then by the end, after she's talked to Miss Temple and she's told her story and has been kind of absolved of her guilt, she kind of flourishes at this school. And that's what you want. That's something that I mean, it's been a long time since I've been in grade school, and but I think about, and we've joked about this in the entire time that we've known each other. I probably could have applied myself better in school. I didn't read books that I was supposed to read. I was more interested in hanging out with my friends and doing PE and stuff like that. I was, but it seemed like I always had a good teacher along the line, and I paid attention, and I was really good at math, and not so much in English, but it's that positive influence that teachers are supposed to be. How they're incredibly underpaid they are, and how important they are in society, right? Yeah.
It does seem that Jane, I think it's different for different children, but like this whole experience has made Jane more motivated to be a good student and to apply herself and to learn. I think she has, she's interested in improving herself. And this is like a character trait for her where, maybe for Helen, she's not as interested in self-improvement. She's more interested in the things that she focuses more on, specific things that interest her. Whereas Jane is open-minded, and she's taking in all these different things like learning French and drawing and,
And she's doing it, I've noticed she's doing it without having specific positive reinforcement. Like, there's no reward for this other than just education.
Yeah.
Like Miss Temple, she's giving you some bread. But
I think the reward might be just the general approval of her teachers and her peers. Like,
yeah.
I can think of that as being a motivating factor for me when I was young, of like wanting to do well so that, you know, my teachers will know that I'm a good student, and they'll point that out. Yeah.
There's no physical, tangible thing. It's just more about that feeling of accomplishment.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
Feeling of accomplishment.
And that's why, you know, and it's something that if you wanted to, I can ask you now, which is the idea of, was there a Miss Temple in your life? You know, did we have someone specifically when you were of that grade young. School age? Because I feel like I had one, but mine offered more of a tangible reward. But did you have one that you wanted to just be good because you wanted to make her proud or make him proud?
I think generally I just always wanted to make my teachers proud and always be a good student. But yeah, I have this one specific memory of when, like, I think it was in second grade, and we were going to go on our bathroom break. There's maybe a little group of us that were supposed to be escorted to the bathroom, and the teacher told us to wait at the door. And for some reason, the other kids just went, like they headed out towards the bathroom, and I waited at the door. And I remember the teacher, as she passed by me, she just said something like, "Oh, such a good kid," or something like that. And, you know, that just filled me with so much joy to be thought of as a good kid. But there was another teacher in fourth grade that, you know, as I read this chapter with Miss Temple, her name was Miss Seymour. She kind of reminds me of Miss Temple, or how Jane describes her, just because she's has such a calm demeanor, and she seems like really knowledgeable. And this teacher, she was also had these attributes, and I felt like she was very pretty, which I think Jane remarks upon more than once about Miss Temple, which I guess, I don't know if that the aesthetics of this teacher also helped the fact that she's such a good person. But yeah, Miss Seymour from fourth grade.
Yeah, I wish I knew the name of mine. I feel bad that I can't remember, but I was in sixth grade, and we had one of our, obviously grade school units had the one classroom for all of your classes, or maybe it might have been two different classrooms we had. But this one particular teacher, in her classroom, above the chalkboard, lining the walls of all four walls in the room, she had portraits of all the American presidents.
Oh.
But there were no names. It was just the portraits, and then underneath the portraits were numbers, not the number of what president they were, just the random numbers.
Oh, no.
And at the beginning of the school year, the teacher told us, if she had like a form that she filled out. I'm dating myself here, but this was during Reagan was president, so there were only 40 presidents, 39 if you count.
Oh yeah, so much easier.
39 presidents if you count Grover Cleveland being president twice. But and so she had these 39 portraits around the wall, and she had a form that was labeled 1 through 39. And then she said, if you can fill out this form and correctly get all the presidents, then I will take all the people who could do it and do it correctly.
Yeah.
I will take them to Sizzler.
Oh.
And so there was, I think, 3, maybe 4 of us. I think it was 3 of us, because we all piled into her car one day for lunch.
Oh, wow.
And she took us to Sizzler because, like I said, I got them all right. Like, I was really into presidents back then.
Yeah.
And I could spot I wonder how if I could still do it. Maybe I get a few of them confused.
I think so. This is your little parlor trick, I feel like.
Oh,
you could recall all the presidents in order.
I could do them. I could definitely recall their names in order, but just seeing the pictures, I think Rutherford B. Hayes and Benjamin Harrison, I get a little confused sometimes if I saw pictures of them. Chester Arthur, you know. But it was something that, like, again, we got more of a tangible reward. We got a trip to Sizzler out of it. But I really wanted to impress her, and also to impress my parents as well, because I don't know if the teacher put that in my report card back to them right next to the part that said Michael still talks to all of his students, to his fellow students too much. But
good news, he knows all the presidents.
yeah. And so I think that at a young age, again, I had good teachers when I was in college as well. But I think the grade school era teachers, they're just basically babysitters at a certain point, right? Like they have to. I mean in a good way. Like, they're teaching you, but they also have to be psychologists at the same time, and had to figure out how am I going to keep their attention and doing these things. And so those are the ones that have more of a profound effect on you. I think when you get into college, you're paying to be there. You know,
that's
and
true,
it's
yeah.
like you kind of want to pay attention because you feel like I need to get this degree and get out of here versus I want to learn this because I should know it. You know, when I'm in 5th grade or 6th grade, like I was in that case. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think now we can talk a little bit about Helen in this chapter.
Best character in the book.
And I just it's great that she's been portrayed as this really meek, kind, thoughtful, and religious. But in this chapter, when she's talking to Miss Temple, you get this sense of her being like a brilliant person, like knowing a lot of things, and she can speak so eloquently, and she pulls out all this esoteric knowledge that Jane is in awe of, and it's a great side of Helen because, you know, I think because of the way that she's treated by Miss Scatcherd, of her, she's being a little flighty or daydreaming, that you think, oh, maybe she's not a very good student, but she does seems to take in things that she reads and thinks about things deeply, and she has this like great philosophical mindset that, you know, it's just impressive for a girl of her age.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I can always sing the praises of Helen Burns. I do think that sometimes she can be a little self-righteous.
It just comes with religion, maybe.
Well, not just like, and also the knowledge that she imparts, and I'm sure I probably come off like that sometimes with the random factoids that I throw at you and our friends and family sometimes. But you know, but what I like about Helen is that, as you mentioned, I think Miss Scatcherd is always punishing her because Helen herself, I think later in the chapter, she says something about like, oh, I was supposed to do that thing and I forgot it.
Yeah.
You know, like she's self-righteous, but she's also forgetful and error prone. And, you know, in a way, she's human.
Yeah.
She's a very well-rounded character. And I like that she's trying to make Jane better. I think there's a 4-year age difference. And so I can appreciate the fact that rather than just trying to continue to make herself better, she's trying to, you know, usually don't pass on wisdom to somebody 4 years younger than you until you're a little older, than 14 to 10, you know. I mean, unfortunately, I think Helen is kind of preachy, though, you know. I mean, yes, life is finite. I get it. But then I don't know if a 14-year-old should be thinking like that, you know,
No,
unless,
she
like I said,
shouldn't.
unless I was wondering maybe she's already witnessed her share of death. And so maybe you wonder, like, I'll be lucky to live to a certain age. Maybe she's got siblings or she's known other people who have died very young. And so she's like, throw myself into religion, find my own inner peace. And that way, if something should happen to me, then I'll be more prepared.
I mean, her mindset does seem to be, I'm not going to last long. I don't know if it's because she doesn't think that she can survive in this world, or does this cough that she has worry her? I don't know. I wonder. But
do they have an apothecary at Lowood that can check her out?
Well, you think that Miss Temple would have had someone come see Helen. So I don't know. Maybe they didn't really think that it was that serious, or it's just, oh well, she's cold and she doesn't have a lot of food, or so many reasons why she could have a cough, I guess. So when we talked about chapter 6, we went into Helen's wisdom and Jane's wisdom. So in this chapter, I feel like there's another instance where we can kind of look at what Helen's saying, even though Helen has a lot of great ideas in here, and then what Jane is saying. And last time we had you, Mike, play Helen, so let's do that again.
I'll be playing the role of Helen here. Yeah. Well, the first quote that sticks out, and I think you always wanted to draw from that when talk about the great wisdom that she imparts in chapter 8, is she says, "If all the world hated you and believed you wicked, while your own conscience approved you and absolved you from guilt, you would not be without friends."
Yeah, that's a great thought, because at least for Jane right now, she's very in her head about what everyone's thinking about her now after what Mr. Brocklehurst said. And, you know, no one can think that way, because it's going to drive us crazy if we always worried about what other people said.
Yeah, I feel like, especially with 10-year-olds, you kind of have to be taught this at some point during your childhood development. Like, you know, you're not going to figure it out for yourself. Someone else is going to have to tell you. And then, like I think I mentioned in the last chapter, is that Jane, yeah, you're right. Jane is so concerned about what other people think of her, you know, and that's something that maybe I don't know if that's normal for 10-year-olds. I mean, maybe not everybody, but maybe somebody, just the people that are in your innermost circle, or
right.
at least,
or the people like, your other friends if you want to be cool, right?
yeah.
You have to wear the right kind of clothes. I don't know what age that kicks in.
Oh, well, not if you're going to a school where you all have to wear the same stuff. You went through that. I did not.
Love the uniform.
Yeah.
But also this quote gives Jane a lot of perspective. Again, when she's feeling really bad about what other people think about her, then this is, this school doesn't have that many people, and no one else, she went out into the wide world. No one else would think that she's a deceitful liar.
Yeah, and I think there's a great quote in there where Jane, asks Helen, like, why would you stay with a girl who everybody believes to be a liar? And then Helen has to say, there's only 80 people who have heard you called so, and the world contains hundreds of millions. Mm-hmm. Again, best character in the book. And so she's put things in perspective, right? Mm-hmm. It's easy when that is your world.
Yeah.
The only world she's known is Gateshead and Lowood.
Yeah.
And Gateshead, she's already burned all the bridges there for the most part. So
she wanted to make the best of Lowood, and she felt like she couldn't, but...
Yeah, but now it's like, there's still a world outside of Lowood. Hopefully you'll get your education, you'll move on, and then no one will remember what you were like at Lowood.
Yeah.
So, but it must be. I know how difficult that must be when you're kind of a prisoner of the moment.
Yes, and Jane has a comeback for Helen's words, which I think is also a little bit interesting. So we can go into that. Jane says, "No, I know I should think well of myself, but that is not enough. If others don't love me, I would rather die than live. I cannot bear to be solitary and hated, Helen. Look here, to gain some real affection from you, or Miss Temple, or any other whom I truly love, I would willingly submit to have the bone of my arm broken, or to let a bull toss me, or to stand behind a kicking horse and let it dash its hoof at my chest."
Oh, snap. That's her comeback.
Oh, yeah, she's willing to die.
What? She's just, I think you're probably looking into this a lot more than I was, but I read that and I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit because that seemed dramatic. It seemed like she was just being way too dramatic. Like she has to kind of prove her loyalty. Yeah. And I mean, that's a bit much. Having the bone of my arm broken. Was she Tony Jaa? What is she going to be? It's just she's going to do some Muay Thai and then start snapping bone. No, we don't. We don't do that. You could say, "Oh my God, I'd rather die. I don't care if I can't. Everyone doesn't like me." But again, I would imagine that's probably very common in that era. And I mean, maybe I felt like that when I was 10 years old too. I don't remember.
Oh yeah. Well, I it did touch me because Helen presents this very meek and forbearing and forgiving face, and for Jane, who's passionate, we're always going to say that. Showing that she's willing to submit to violence to prove her worth, it feels like a very masculine emotion to Helen's more feminine and calm and demeanor. So, I'm looking into this saying, oh, is this like Charlotte's dropping a little early, a little feminist viewpoint here that women are the equal of men and they have the same feelings as men, because men can engage in violence quite easily, I think.
Men love letting bulls toss them.
Or that you insulted my honor, so let's go shoot some guns at each other or fight with swords or something.
Mm-hmm. Then you got the 10 dual commandments, and then you don't want to throw away your shot. I know.
Right.
Yeah. But then of course Helen has the comeback to the comeback, and right. I can't read the whole thing. I've got it jotted down in front of me, but it's a whole big paragraph, and you can just read the book yourself if you want to hear me read it. But I will pull out a couple of just nuggets that came out of it, and the main thing was, at one point Helen says, "You think too much of the love of human beings," and then she goes on to mention, about this invisible world in the kingdom of spirits, and then how there's all these angels who see our tortures. And, God wants the separation of spirit from the flesh and all this. And then she ends up this whole big monologue by saying, "Why then should we ever sink overwhelmed with distress when life is so soon over and death is so certain an entrance to happiness, to glory?" Again, it gets back to that weird thing where you're just like, I don't know if a 14-year-old should be thinking like this, but it's also, I don't know, in a way, maybe is she trying to be just as dramatic as Jane is, to kind of almost say like, listen to what you sound like. I'll just combat that with my own.
I mean, I don't think that she's doing it on purpose to teach Jane a lesson. I think this is her earnest feelings on the matter that she's, but like you said, it is in a way very dramatic, unnecessarily so. Now that we are having this discussion, I realize, we really don't know a lot about Helen. It's sad that, Jane, or I guess Charlotte Bronte, didn't put in more about why is Helen so
downtrodden, pessimistic. So
why does she gain so much solace from religion, and why does she think about death so much? I mean, unless she, I guess in a later chapter we're going to learn that she lost her mother, and her father's still alive. So I don't know. There's a story behind that, and now that, of course, that makes me think about Charlotte Bronte losing her mother at a very young age. So, yeah. Maybe that also happened to her sister Maria, where she saw more of her mom's death, and she turned to religion even more. And I think it shows something about Jane's character, that when Helen says this to her, that Jane feels a little sad, that she says that there was an alloy of inexpressible sadness. And I think that alloy of sadness comes from the idea that Helen's wisdom is encouraging Jane to ignore oppression and disregard it, and also the idea that death will be the entrance to happiness.
Yeah. And for me, it was kind of also sad because, Helen's saying, pay more attention to these otherworldly beings than those tangible people here around you on Earth. And those are the ones you're going to be spending your life with.
Yeah.
Unless it's just sort of this entire afterlife for eternity. That's going to be better than what you spend on Earth. But yeah, who knows how you're going to be spending that eternity, in what capacity. You're supposed to enjoy your time here, finite as it is, but it does seem a little defeatist at times. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way in the thinking, but as we go on, I think you'll notice that Helen's thoughts and her wisdom will have an effect on Jane and help her through some difficult times. So there's one historical point I'd like to make about the mention that Helen knows a little bit of Latin, and Jane comments that my organ of veneration expanded at every sounding line. So I learned in my Celebrating Charlotte Bronte book that I mentioned in the previous episode that it says that at that time, knowledge of Latin and Greek was part of a classical education and was usually reserved for boys. So Charlotte's father, Patrick Bronte, attained a first in classics at Cambridge, and Patrick may have taught his daughters. It seems like we know that Emily and Anne knew some Latin, but it doesn't seem like Charlotte knew very much, so this knowledge might have seemed even more impressive to her as it does to Jane. So I think it's interesting that Helen gets attributed to have a little bit of Latin, which maybe Maria also had some knowledge of it.
When you were researching this, did you see if Patrick Bronte also imparted Pig Latin to his children?
I don't know if they were fluent in that.
Arlet No? No,
but I am very impressed by your knowledge of Pig Latin.
Oh, I am uintflay. I wonder, that's interesting because, we never studied Latin when I was in school, and I wonder if it was so common back then, and again, if it was only just the men who were learning it.
Yeah.
Have you enjoyed the book I lent you, Helen?
Restless, ma'am. It has impressed me. Dr. Johnson's stoicism is sombre, but very grand. Jane did not like the look of it, because it had no pictures.
Jane is yet young.
I then recalled a line or two from a poem of his.
Yes?
Must helpless man in innocence sedate roll darkling down the torrent of his fate?
I hope Dr. Johnson denied that idea, does he?
Oh, yes, he says, inquirers cease, petitions yet remain, which heaven may hear, nor deem religion vain. Still raise for good the supplicating voice, but leave to heaven the measure and the choice.
And as we like to do on this show, we like to end the episode by reciting a meaningful passage or quote from each chapter. Charlene, I'll let you go first. What do you got for us?
So this is a quote you mentioned at the beginning of the episode. I didn't want to say anything, but let's revisit it now. It's, "We shall think you what you prove yourself to be, my child. Continue to act as a good girl, and you will satisfy me." So here we come to the crux of pretty much 8 chapters of Jane's experiences. Jane has been fighting to be seen as she is, as she acts. She's a good girl, and she wants to be treated as such. You know, she thinks that with Miss Reed, her actions, you know, she tries to follow what everyone says, and still no one likes her, and Mrs. Reed still berates her for things that she doesn't do. But Miss Temple very simply tells her, well, we shall think you what you prove yourself to be. Your actions will speak for themselves. It's so simple.
And she's coming to her defense.
Yes.
She's not just going to listen to hearsay.
Yes.
Right? I mean, although she's going to reach out to other people to get confirmation.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's just for the benefit of being able to say to the school, hey, we reached out, we got some extra information and corroboration from someone who experienced this thing with Jane. Jane's not a liar.
Well, innocent until proven guilty, and Jane finally has a defense attorney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Miss Temple at law.
I object. Mr. Brocklehurst.
So I also see that, you know, Helen's wisdom, as well-meaning as she is, you know, she doesn't reassure Jane of this. Like because she doesn't believe it's important. She just tells Jane to think about her own actions and not worry about what other people think of her. And Miss Temple is saying, don't worry, we'll treat you how you should be treated because you are a good person.
Yeah, like she's finally getting positive reinforcement, right? Mm-hmm. And then she ends up getting cake out of it.
Seed cake.
Seed cake. I'm going to pretend that's actual cake, not just some sort of
I have a little recipe that I saw about that and a little picture, so I'm going to post that on the Instagram at @AirGuide. Oh. If anybody's curious to see what that looks like. I mean, I might try to make it. You know, that would be fun, right?
Mm-hmm. And if we don't like it, we could feed it to the birds.
Oh, yes.
If it's made out of seeds.
Okay, so what's your quote?
Interestingly enough, my quote comes from it's very related to that.
Yeah.
You know, and what I like is that first chapter of this book. It's such a dramatic event that propels the story forward, and it keeps getting referenced. And I've noticed that in the span of 6 chapters now, from chapter 3 through chapter 8, Jane has recounted the events of chapter 1 3 different times to Mr. Lloyd, to Helen, and now Miss Temple. And what makes this one different comes from my quote, which is after she has told, she's basically telling the story to Miss Temple. And she says, quote, "Exhausted by emotion, my language was more subdued than it generally was when it developed that sad theme. And mindful of Helen's warnings against the indulgence of resentment, I infused into the narrative far less of gall and wormwood than ordinary. Thus restrained and simplified, it sounded more credible. I felt as I went on that Miss Temple fully believed me." You know, and I always, like I said, we continually praise Jane for her passion, but by dialing it back just a little, you know, it makes it a little bit easier for the reader or the listener in this situation to pay close attention and sympathize.
And find it more credible.
Yeah, it wasn't just the impatient ramblings of a scorned child. Like, okay, dial it back, because usually that's what happens whenever a child is wronged and they're crying. What do the parents usually say? Calm down.
Yeah.
Start okay,
Too
what was it?
emotional to speak clearly.
Yeah. And exactly. And then once again, I'm going to bring it up again. Jane says, and mindful of Helen's warnings against the indulgence of resentment. Again, that incredibly positive influence from somebody who's only 4 years older than her. Also, best character in the book. But I had to look up. I mean, obviously, gall, I understand what gall means, but wormwood. What exactly is wormwood? And it said that it's a source of bitterness or grief. And it's based on a poisonous shrub that is used in drinks like vermouth and absinthe and in some medicine, but it has like a bitter taste to it. So that's why, wormwood sounds like the last name of a character in medieval times.
Or Harry Potter.
Or Harry Potter. Here you go. Exactly. Is there a character named Wormwood?
Wormtail.
Wormtail. Close enough.
Yes, very close. Well, that'll do for chapter 8. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. This really helps us grow and reach new listeners. If you want to talk Jane Eyre with me online, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at EyreGuide. That's EYRE.
And if you want to hear more from me, I host my own podcast called Out of Touchstone, where my good friend Chad and I discuss all the films that Disney produced for their Touchstone Pictures label. You can also find me on Twitter at Mike DeKalb.
Thank you, and farewell for the present.